At 2:14 in the morning, an empty hospital elevator opened on a floor that had been sealed for 22 years. The security camera showed no one inside, but the elevator's weight sensor registered 3 passengers. 8 seconds later, the doors closed. The car returned to the ground floor empty. St. Adrian's Hospital had no second basement. Not according to its public floor plan. Not according to the fire department. And not according to the elevator panel used by staff every day. The lowest button in the main service car was marked bone. Below it, there was only brushed steel. On March 17, 2008, the elevator controller recorded something that should not have been possible. At 2:14:07, it received a landing call from B2OA. 4 seconds later, the car began descending below the hospital basement. At 2:14:11, the doors opened. At 2:14:13, the load sensor increased by 182 kilograms. At 2:14:21, the ground floor button registered a selection. The elevator returned to the lobby. The camera inside the car showed no passengers entering or leaving. The first person to notice was Daniel Mercer, the hospital's night security officer. He did not report a ghost. He reported a mechanical failure capable of trapping patients below ground. Mercer had worked the overnight shift for 6 years. He knew the sound of the service elevator, the delay between floors, and the brief electrical click that came before the doors opened. At 2:14, he heard the car descend past bone. That was the first detail he could not explain. The second appeared on his monitor. The doors opened onto darkness. There was no landing light. No corridor. Only a narrow strip of tile visible beyond the threshold. The car remained open for 14 seconds. Then the interior lights dimmed. When they returned, the camera still showed an empty cabin. But the weight display on Mercer's maintenance screen read 182 kilograms, approximately the combined weight of 3 adults. Mercer called the engineering desk. Before anyone answered, the elevator selected the ground floor by itself. Mercer reached the lobby before the elevator arrived. The display above the doors showed bone. Then it went blank. For less than a second, a red segment appeared beneath the basement indicator. There was no label beside it. The doors opened. The car was empty. Mercer stepped inside and smelled something he had not encountered since the hospital renovation. Bleach. Wet fabric. And a metallic odor like old surgical instruments. The control panel was dry. The walls were clean. But 2 narrow tracks crossed the rubber floor from the rear wall to the doors. They resembled the marks left by a hospital bed. Between them were 4 smaller wheel prints. The tracks stopped at the threshold. Nothing continued into the lobby. Mercer checked the emergency compartment, the ceiling hatch, and the service key controls. Nothing had been disturbed. The ground floor button was illuminated. He pressed the door open switch and waited for maintenance. As the doors closed again, he heard a bell from the elevator speaker. Not the normal arrival tone. A short double chime used in older hospital wards to signal a patient call. St. Adrian's had removed that system in 1994. The next morning, Mercer filed an incident report. By noon, the elevator company had downloaded the controller history. The impossible trip was not an isolated event. The car had traveled below bone 11 times that week. All 11 trips began between 2:13 and 2:15 in the morning. Each recorded the same sequence. A landing call from B2Q. Doors open. Load increases. Ground floor select. No corresponding button press appeared on the cabin camera. The elevator company assigned the case to senior engineer Rachel Voss-Diane. Her initial explanation was simple. A corrupted floor address. Modern controllers can retain unused destinations after renovations. A damaged relay, a software error, or an incorrectly terminated wire can cause a car to stop where no active landing exists. But one part of the data did not fit. The load increased only after the doors opened. A corrupted address could move the elevator. It could not place weight inside it. Voss arrived during the following night shift. She placed the car in inspection mode and tested every registered destination. Ground. 1 through 8. Bone. 1. No B2 address appeared in the active configuration. She checked the fire service controls, emergency recall, remote maintenance access, and the building automation network. None had issued the calls. The controller clock matched the security system to within 1 second. At 2:10, Voss cleared the event memory and positioned the elevator at the ground floor. Mercer watched from the security desk. At 2:14:06, a new landing request appeared. Source: B2. Voss did not allow the car to move. She cut power to the traction motor while leaving the controller and sensors online. The request remained active. Then the load display changed. 0 kilograms. 47. 112. 180. The car had not moved. The doors had not opened. No one was inside. The wait remained for 8 seconds, then returned to 0. Voss repeated the test with a second calibrated sensor, placed beneath the cabin frame. It recorded the same change. The force did not originate from a person standing in the elevator. It came from below the car. Something had pulled the cabin downward with the equivalent weight of 3 adults. The following morning, Voss requested the original shaft drawing. The current plan showed the elevator pit ending 1.5 meters below bone. The measurements from the inspection system indicated more than 5 meters of empty shaft below the basement landing. St. Adrian's did not merely have space for another level. The service elevator shaft physically continued to 1. The hospital archive contained 11 versions of the building plan. The newest 10 ended at bone. The oldest did not. A 1961 construction drawing showed a lower level beneath the basement. It was not labeled B22. Its full designation was Sublevel Medical Isolation, Annex. The floor contained 5 patient rooms, a negative pressure corridor, a treatment area, an oxygen store, and a narrow service tunnel leading toward an older utility building. Access was controlled by a separate nurse station. The elevator drawing included a landing on that level. The corresponding button was marked with a small black triangle rather than a number. In 1986, the annex disappeared from every later plan. A single engineering note explained the change. Access removed. Floor designation deleted. Vertical transport disabled. Deleted. Not closed. Not sealed. Deleted. The archive contained a fire report from October 1986. At 2:06 in the morning, an electrical fault ignited insulation inside a ventilation chamber adjacent to the isolation annex. Smoke entered the corridor. The main power supply failed. Emergency lighting activated for 8 minutes. The official report stated that 1 electrical contractor died and that all patients were transferred before the annex was sealed. But no transfer list was attached. There was no ambulance record. No receiving ward log. No signed evacuation sheet. A separate nursing ledger listed 7 occupied rooms immediately before the fire. The entries stopped at 2:14. The last line read, "Elevator requested, no response." The next 4 pages had been removed. A paper conservator examined the binding and concluded that the pages had not been lost to age or water damage. They had been cut out with a blade while the ledger was still relatively new. Only the pressure marks remained. Under angled light, several words could be recovered from the page beneath them. "Smoke at west door, patients waiting." And one repeated instruction, "Keep the elevator here." The last visible mark was not a sentence. It was a column of 7 short lines, each crossed once, as if someone had been counting people while they entered the car. 22 years later, the new controller began answering calls at the exact minute the old elevator failed to arrive. Voss received permission to inspect the lower shaft. The hospital refused to open the sealed annex itself. The stated reason was asbestos. The service car was locked above bone, and a camera was lowered through the pit. 3 meters below the visible basement floor, the lens found a second pair of elevator doors. They were covered in dust, but not uniformly. A vertical strip near the center was clean. The doors had moved recently. Mounted beside them was a corroded call box. Its wiring had been cut. The cable ended half a meter from the wall. There was no physical connection to the modern controller. Behind the call box, Voss found a mechanical indicator with 3 positions. Down. Me. Here. Me. When. Up. The pointer was fixed at here. The old landing doors could be opened only a few centimeters from the shaft's side. Through the gap, the camera recorded a tiled corridor. The walls were dark with smoke staining. A patient trolley lay on its side. A row of emergency lights glowed faintly along the ceiling. The annex had been disconnected from the hospital electrical system for more than 2 decades. No cable visible on the drawings could still power those lamps. Mercer later said the corridor did not look abandoned. It looked paused. A chart still hung from the overturned trolley. A metal cup stood upright on the floor. At the far end of the corridor, a red nurse call lamp was illuminated above one of the rooms. The inspection camera had no microphone. Voss used a separate audio recorder placed against the landing door. For 20 minutes, it captured only building vibration and the movement of the elevator cables. At 2:14, a call bell sounded from inside the annex. 7 times. A pause. Then once more. At the same moment, the elevator controller registered a new B2 request died out. Voss disconnected the recorder and reviewed the waveform. The 7 calls were evenly spaced. The 8th was different. It was longer, lower in pitch, and partially masked by a vibration traveling through the landing doors. When the sound was slowed, Mercer believed he could hear a second noise beneath the bell. Metal wheels moving over tile. The hospital rejected that interpretation. It classified the recording as structural noise and ordered the inspection team to leave the shaft. Before they withdrew the camera, the red lamp at the end of the corridor switched off. The emergency lights followed one by one, beginning at the far room and moving toward the elevator doors. The final light went dark directly in front of the camera. The hospital administration maintained that all patients had survived the 1986 fire tour. The quiet report could not find records confirming that claim. The isolation ledger listed 7 occupied rooms. Only 6 names were partially legible. 1 patient had been admitted with severe respiratory failure. 2 were being held for observation after chemical exposure at a nearby factory. 1 was a child transferred under an emergency order. The final 2 names were hidden beneath water damage. A handwritten note beside the 7th room read, "Do not move without oxygen support." The fire report stated that the annex was clear by 2:12. The nursing ledger showed staff requesting the elevator at 2:14. An internal maintenance memo, written 3 days after the fire, contained a different account. According to that memo, the elevator had reached the isolation level after the power failure. Its doors opened. The cabin remained there for 8 seconds. Then the car returned to the ground floor. No one was inside. The load system recorded 412 kilograms. That figure appeared again in 2008. It was approximately the combined weight of 7 patients and the equipment required to move them. The memo recommended removing the lower landing address from the replacement controller. It also instructed staff not to enter the shaft between 2:10 and 2:20 in the morning. No reason was given. The author's signature had been cut from the page. A second document was filed behind the memo, a handwritten inventory of objects removed from the elevator after the fire. It listed a scorched oxygen mask, 2 patient wristbands, a child-sized blanket, and 7 brass bed number tags. The final entry was a service key that did not belong to the hospital's maintenance department. Its stamped number matched the key switch used to place the old elevator in attendant mode. In that mode, the car would ignore normal floor calls and remain with the operator until every passenger had been loaded. The key itself was missing from the evidence envelope. Voss believed the repeated calls could still have a mechanical explanation. An old counterweight, a shifting cable, or water pressure beneath the pit might affect the load sensors. But none of those explanations accounted for the time, or for the active request from an address that did not exist in software. She proposed one final controlled test. The hospital agreed on the condition that the annex doors remain closed. On March 24th, the service elevator was emptied and inspected. 2 cameras were placed inside the cabin. A third recorded the motor room. The main load sensor was checked against calibrated weights. A separate strain gauge was attached to the suspension assembly. The car was parked at the ground floor. The motor remained powered, but Voss held the emergency stop key. At 2:13:58, the elevator was empty. At 2:14:0, the controller registered a landing call from B2. At 2:14:2, the car began descending. Voss activated the emergency stop before it reached bone. The cabin stopped between floors. The doors remained locked. At 2:14:7, the main sensor increased from 0 to 182 kilograms. Then to 290. Then to 412. The secondary strain gauge matched it. The cabin had not reached the hidden landing. Nothing could have entered through the doors. For 8 seconds, both cameras inside the elevator lost their image. The motor room camera continued recording normally. The weight remained at 412 kilograms. A button illuminated inside the cabin. Ground floor. When the video returned, the elevator was still empty. Water covered the inside surface of the doors. 7 vertical marks ran through it from shoulder height to the floor. Not handprints. Not fingerprints. Long parallel trails, as if 7 people had leaned against the doors while they were moving. Voss released the emergency stop. The car returned to the lobby. The moment the doors opened, the load fell to 0. Mercer stood outside. He heard the old nurse call chime from inside the cabin. This time it sounded 7 times. Voss ended the test. In her report, she wrote that the elevator had experienced an unverified external load event associated with a non-addressable landing request. She recommended physical isolation of the lower shaft. She also added one sentence that did not appear in the version released to the hospital's insurers. The car did not collect the load from the sealed floor. The load was present before the car reached it. St. Adrian's removed the service elevator from operation for 6 weeks. The lower shaft was separated by a steel barrier installed above the old landing. A mechanical stop prevented the car from descending below bone. The controller was replaced. Its firmware contained no unused floor addresses. The load sensors were changed. The nurse call wiring was traced and removed from the main building. After the work was completed, the unexplained trips stopped. For almost 1 year, no B2 calls appeared. Then, during the annual safety inspection, the replacement controller printed a single event. The timestamp was 2:14 in the morning. External call received. Source: unassigned landing. Passengers: 7. Request: ground floor. The elevator did not move. The mechanical stop remained intact. The event appeared only in the printer buffer. No matching entry existed in the controller memory. The manufacturer inspected the unit and found no fault. It recreated every available test condition at its workshop. The printer could not generate a passenger count on its own. That field had to be supplied by the controller. The controller manufacturer reached the opposite conclusion. Its engineers found no command in the firmware capable of producing the phrase, unassigned landing. The wording did not exist in the language file installed at St. Adrian's. The hospital retained the paper strip, but refused to release the controller image or the printer memory. The printer was replaced. 1 year later, the same message appeared again. Same date. Same time. Same 7 passengers. St. Adrian's Hospital no longer has a second basement. The public plans end at bone. The stairwell is sealed. The corridor is inaccessible. And the elevator controller contains no address for the isolation annex. But once every year, at 2:14 in the morning, the system records a call from an unassigned landing. The request is always the same. 7 passengers. Ground floor. The elevator no longer has a button for that level. According to the maintenance logs, it no longer needs one.